I didn't go to Gatlinburg looking for answers. I went to say goodbye to my brother. The doctors said his body had failed, but they could never explain why. In his last days, he wouldn't stop talking about the mountains. He said something was waiting for him there. Watching. Not hunting. Waiting. I thought it was the effect of the medication. I thought grief was already distorting his mind. I didn't know, at the time, that he wasn't afraid. He was certain. 3 days after he died, I found myself alone in the Smoky Mountains, holding his ashes in my hands, surrounded by very old trees. The forest was silent in a way that didn't seem natural. It seemed conscious. As if something had already sensed my presence. It was at that moment that I understood something I still can't explain. The mountain didn't seem empty. It seemed inhabited. At first, it was just a feeling. The kind of feeling you try to ignore. That you try to convince yourself isn't real. But then I heard something behind me. A single footstep. Heavy. Controlled. It wasn't the random movement of an animal. It wasn't the wind. It was intentional. Something wanted me to know it was there. I didn't run. Because, deep down, I already knew. It wasn't following me. It was waiting for me. And what I saw on that mountain changed everything I believed about death, about grief, and about what still watches us when we believe we are completely alone. But before I tell you what happened, I need to ask you something. Have you ever felt like you were being watched in the forest, even when there was nothing there? And if you did, do you think it was fear? Or do you think something was watching you back? Because what I'm going to tell you isn't just a story. It's what happened after my brother died, and the day I realized Sasquatch was watching me. I came to Gatlinburg because the mountains don't ask questions. They just stand there, patient and ancient, and after my brother died, I needed something that didn't try to fix me with words. The drive into town felt like slipping into a postcard, fog clinging to the ridgelines, evergreens stacked like shadows, cabins perched on slopes as if they'd grown there. People laughed in clusters near the strip, neon lights blinking over taffy shops and arcades, and I hated them for a second because their joy looked effortless. Then I hated myself for hating them. My brother, Owen, would have made a joke right there, something soft and stupid that would have cracked my grief just enough to breathe. Instead, I parked alone, hands locked on the steering wheel, and listened to my own heartbeat like it was a stranger trapped in my chest. I told myself this trip was about closure, about scattering his ashes somewhere that felt worthy, somewhere he would have loved. But the truth was uglier and simpler. I came because the silence at home had started to feel like a living thing, and I wanted the noise of tourists and traffic to drown it out. The first night I rented a small cabin above town, the kind with a porch swing and a hot tub that smelled faintly of chlorine and old pine. Inside, everything was staged for happiness: a stone fireplace, bear-themed decor, a guest book with handwritten stories about anniversaries and engagements. I set Owen's urn on the mantel like it belonged there, like grief was just another souvenir. Through the back windows, the woods pressed close, dense and black, as if the cabin had been built in the mouth of a sleeping animal. When the wind moved, the treetops rubbed together with a sound like whispering. I poured a drink I didn't want, sat on the couch, and tried to replay the last phone call I'd had with Owen, his voice bright, too bright, like he was trying to outrun something. "I'll be fine," he'd said. "I'm telling you, I just need a reset." 2 days later, I was identifying his body under fluorescent hospital lights, staring at his still face and thinking, impossibly, that he looked annoyed to be interrupted. That memory followed me into the cabin like a second shadow, and when I finally turned off the lights, I lay in bed listening to the mountains quiet and wondering how a place so alive could feel so indifferent. In the morning, Gatlinburg tried its best to charm me. The air smelled like fried dough and wet leaves. I walked past storefronts, past families in matching hoodies, past couples holding hands like the world couldn't touch them. I bought coffee and stood at the edge of a small footbridge where a creek ran fast over stones, the water cold and clear enough to make my eyes sting. I kept thinking I'd see Owen in the crowd, that familiar slouch and half-smile, the way he'd lift his chin as if he'd spotted me first. Grief does that, turns strangers into ghosts you almost recognize. I told myself to focus on the plan. Clingman's Dome. Newfound Gap. A spot high enough that the wind could carry him anywhere. Owen loved heights. He used to say the best way to understand fear was to look down and realize your knees were honest even when you weren't. Standing there by the creek, I realized I hadn't cried since I crossed into Tennessee, and that scared me more than tears ever could. It felt like my body was saving something up. The first time I noticed the feeling of being watched, it was so subtle I nearly dismissed it as nerves. I was driving the winding road toward the Smokies, trees blurring into green walls, sunlight flickering through branches like a faulty film reel. A pullout appeared ahead, and I took it without thinking, parking beside a weathered sign that warned about bears. The air up there was cooler, and the forest smelled deep, like earth turned over. I stepped to the edge where the slope dropped away into a sea of treetops. For a moment, the view softened me. Then my skin tightened, prickling at the nape of my neck. It wasn't the usual paranoia of being alone in the woods. It felt targeted, precise, as if something had decided I was the most important object in the world. I scanned the tree line, expecting to see a ranger or a hiker. Nothing. Just trunks, leaves, and shadows. But the sensation didn't fade. It settled in, patient as moss. When I turned back toward my car, my eyes caught on a gap between two hemlocks across the road, and for a fraction of a second, the shadow there looked taller than it should have been. I told myself it was a bear standing up. I told myself it was my mind trying to turn grief into a story because grief without a story is just pain. I got back in the car and drove, yet the feeling stayed with me like a hand hovering an inch from my back. At Newfound Gap, I joined the crowd, forcing myself to be normal. I took photos I didn't care about. I smiled at a couple who asked me to snap theirs. I walked a short trail where the trees leaned close and the air tasted like rain. The whole time, I kept catching myself glancing over my shoulder, searching for movement that never came. When I looked at my phone, I saw my own reflection in the screen, eyes too wide, mouth set hard, and I realized I was angry. Not at the woods. Not at strangers. At Owen. At death. At whatever invisible line he'd crossed without me. I wanted something to blame, and the forest gave my mind a shape to chase. That night, back at the cabin, I tried to sleep early, but the quiet had changed. It wasn't just silence anymore. It felt structured, like something was arranging itself outside. I sat on the porch with the urn beside my feet, wrapped in a blanket, listening. Crickets sang, then stopped, as if a switch had been flipped. The woods held its breath. Far off, a dog barked once and went quiet. A strange sound drifted down the slope, low and hollow, like a wooden instrument played wrong, like a throat trying to remember language. My stomach tightened so fast I tasted metal. I leaned forward, squinting into the dark, and that's when I saw it, a shape at the tree line, just beyond where the porch light reached. It wasn't moving like an animal. It was standing still, too still, as if a new motion would betray it. The outline looked bulky, tall, with shoulders that didn't taper the way a bear's would. I blinked, and the porch light flickered, and for a heartbeat the shape seemed to shift, like it was adjusting its stance. My hands went numb. I didn't scream. I couldn't. The sound died in my throat before it formed, swallowed by the same part of me that had stayed dry all day. I tried to focus on details, fur, eyes, anything. But the darkness blurred the edges, and my brain filled in the blanks with every scary story I'd ever heard. Sasquatch. Bigfoot. The word felt ridiculous and childish, something meant for late-night documentaries and gift shop mugs. Yet the moment my mind labeled it, the label stuck, heavy as a stone. The figure remained at the tree line, facing the porch, facing me. And I knew it was watching because I could feel its attention like heat. I stood slowly, the blanket sliding off my shoulders, and the wood of the porch creaked under my weight. Immediately, the shape reacted, not fleeing, not charging, just shifting again, as if it was recalculating. That was the worst part. Animals panic or attack. This felt like a decision. I backed toward the door without taking my eyes off it. My fingers fumbled the handle. The porch light buzzed, and the night smelled suddenly sharp, like crushed leaves. When I got inside, I locked the door, then locked it again, as if the second lock could seal my fear. Through the window, I stared at the tree line. The shape was still there. Not closer. Not farther. Just present. The longer I watched, the more my mind tried to make it normal. A stump. A shadow. A trick of light. But then it moved, and the movement wasn't an animal scramble, it was a slow, controlled step sideways, disappearing behind a trunk that would have been too narrow to hide something that big. And that's when the truly impossible thought hit me: it wasn't hiding from me. It was hiding with intention, like it understood what a window was, like it understood what it meant to be seen. I didn't sleep. I sat on the couch with every light on, the TV muted, the remote clenched in my palm as if it were a weapon. Around midnight, something hit the side of the cabin, soft, but heavy enough to make the wall thud. I froze, breath-trapped. A second thud followed, closer to the back window. Then silence. I waited for scratching, for glass breaking, for the doorknob to rattle. Nothing. Minutes stretched until they felt like hours. My phone screen lit the room with a pale glow as I searched for Sasquatch sightings Gatlinburg, and the results blurred together: blogs, forums, shaky videos, stories that sounded like lies until you were alone in a cabin and your hands wouldn't stop shaking. I kept returning to one detail people mentioned over and over: the feeling of being watched, not hunted. Observed. Studied. Like prey that hadn't been chosen yet. Near dawn, I finally stood and went to the window. The porch was empty. The tree line was just trees again. Morning light seeped into the forest, revealing harmless details: fallen branches, damp leaves, the gentle slope down to the woods. I almost convinced myself I'd imagined it. Then I saw the footprints. They started at the edge of the porch steps, deep impressions in the soft earth, wider than my hand, long as my forearm. 5 toe marks. A heavy heel. The prints moved away from the cabin in a slow, deliberate line, not scattered like an animal's. They paused near the hot tub, where the cover had been shifted slightly, as if something had leaned close to inspect it. Then they continued toward the trees, fading where the ground turned hard. My throat tightened, and for the first time since Owen died, tears came, hot and sudden, not just fear, but something else underneath it. A terrible realization that the world was still full of mysteries, and my brother had stepped out of it forever. I knelt by the prints like a detective in a nightmare, tracing the edge of one with my finger without fully touching it, as if contact would make it more real. My mind rushed to explanations: prank, costume, some local messing with tourists. But the depth of the impression suggested weight, a kind of weight that made my bones ache just thinking about it. I looked up at the trees, and the feeling returned, softer now but unmistakable. Watched. Only this time, it didn't feel predatory. It felt curious. And that scared me in a different way, because curiosity implies a mind, and a mind implies motives. I stood and turned in a slow circle, scanning the woods, and that's when I saw a break in the branches higher up on the slope, like something tall had pushed through. For a moment, I thought I saw a face, dark, framed by hair, eyes set deep like shadowed stones. Then it was gone, and the leaves settled, and I couldn't tell if I'd truly seen anything at all. By mid-morning, I should have packed up and left. Any sensible person would have. But I didn't come to Gatlinburg to be sensible. I came because a part of me wanted the universe to prove it still had surprises, still had something that could cut through my numbness. And now it had. I carried Owen's urn to the porch and sat with it in my lap, staring at the place where the footprints began. My hands trembled, not just from fear, but from a strange, shameful spark of anticipation. If the thing was real, if it was out there and watching me, then last night wasn't an accident. It was contact. An encounter. A door cracked open. I whispered Owen's name into the mountain air, as if he could answer through the trees, and the wind stirred the branches like a sigh. Somewhere in the woods, a low sound rolled again, distant, hollow, almost like a warning. And I understood, with cold certainty, that this was only the beginning of what the mountains intended to show me. I should have left that morning. Every logical instinct told me to pack Owen's urn, get in the car, and drive until the mountains disappeared in the rearview mirror. But logic had stopped being my compass the moment I watched them zip his body into a bag. Grief rewires your sense of danger. It makes you crave answers more than safety. I stood on the porch staring at the fading footprints, the way they dissolved into nothing at the edge of the forest, and something inside me refused to accept that they ended there. Tracks don't simply vanish unless whatever made them understands concealment. That thought lodged deep in my chest, heavier than fear. It suggested awareness, intention, intelligence. I found myself whispering into the empty air, asking questions I knew couldn't be answered, hoping the trees might echo something back. Back inside the cabin, I sat at the small wooden table near the window, Owen's urn in front of me, and for the first time since arriving, I spoke to him out loud. My voice sounded thin, unfamiliar, like it belonged to someone younger and more fragile. "You would have loved this," I said, and immediately felt the weight of the lie. Owen would have loved the mystery, yes, but not the emptiness that surrounded it. He had always believed that the world was bigger than what we could measure. He used to say that unexplained things weren't meant to scare us, they were meant to remind us that we weren't in control. At the time, I dismissed it as poetic nonsense. Now, sitting in a cabin where something impossible had stood watching me, his words felt less like poetry and more like warning. The mountain didn't feel empty anymore. It felt occupied. I made coffee and stepped onto the porch again, forcing myself to act normal, even though normal had lost its meaning. The sunlight stretched across the clearing, revealing every detail in harsh clarity. The prints were already fading as the ground dried, as if the earth itself was erasing evidence. I crouched and took photos with my phone, my hands trembling just enough to blur the edges. Each image looked unreal, like something staged. But the memory of last night's stillness was too vivid to dismiss. The way it had stood there, unmoving, watching me with patience that felt ancient. I realized then that whatever it was, it hadn't been passing through. It had stopped. It had chosen that moment. Chosen me. The idea was terrifying, but beneath the terror was something else, something harder to admit. I wanted to understand why. As I stood there, I remembered something Owen used to do when we were kids. Whenever we got lost in the woods behind our old house, he would stop walking and listen. "The forest always tells you what it wants," he said once. "You just have to shut up long enough to hear it." At the time, I thought he was being dramatic. But now, standing in Gatlinburg with the mountains breathing around me, I realized he might have been right. The air carried layers of sound, wind brushing leaves, distant birds, the faint groan of branches shifting. And beneath it all, something else. Not a sound exactly. More like an absence, a silence shaped around presence. I felt it watching again, not from one direction, but from everywhere at once. The sensation made my chest tighten, but I didn't run. I stood there, waiting, as if waiting was part of the conversation. If you're listening to this story right now, wherever you are, whether you're in a city surrounded by noise or alone in your own quiet room, I want you to imagine that feeling. Imagine knowing something sees you when you can't see it back. Would you stay, or would you run? And more importantly, what would you do in my place? If you've ever experienced something unexplainable, I want you to share it. Tell me where you're watching from, and tell me what you think I should do next. Because standing there on that porch, I realized something terrifying and undeniable. Whatever was out there wasn't finished with me yet. The rest of the day passed in a strange blur. I drove into town, moving through crowds like a ghost wearing someone else's body. People laughed, argued, carried shopping bags filled with souvenirs that would eventually collect dust on shelves. I wondered how many of them had ever stood face to face with something that shattered their understanding of reality. Probably none. Or maybe more than I realized. Maybe the difference between ordinary life and something extraordinary was simply the willingness to see it. I bought supplies I didn't need: flashlights, bottled water, a cheap folding knife, as if preparing for something I couldn't define. The cashier barely looked at me, and I was grateful. I wasn't ready to explain the fear coiled inside me. On my way back to the cabin, I stopped at the same overlook where I'd first felt watched. The air was colder now, heavier somehow. I stepped out of the car slowly, my senses sharp. The trees stood motionless, their shadows stretching long across the ground. For a moment, nothing happened. Then I saw it. Not the creature itself, but movement, subtle, deliberate, high on the slope. A branch bent under weight too heavy for wind. My heart slammed against my ribs so hard it hurt. I held my breath, waiting for it to emerge. It didn't. Instead, the movement stopped, as if whatever made it had realized I was watching. The silence that followed was deafening. It wasn't fear I felt in that moment. It was recognition. The same awareness that had existed on my porch the night before. I didn't approach. Every instinct told me that distance was the only thing keeping me safe. Instead, I stood there and did something I still don't fully understand. I spoke. "I know you're there," I said quietly, my voice barely louder than the wind. The words hung in the air, fragile and absurd. For a moment, nothing changed. Then, from somewhere deeper in the trees, came that same low, hollow sound I'd heard the night before. It wasn't loud. It wasn't aggressive. It was deliberate. Like an answer. My blood ran cold. This wasn't random. This was interaction. Whatever was out there wasn't just observing. It was responding. I backed away slowly, refusing to break eye contact with the place where the movement had been. My mind raced with possibilities, each one more impossible than the last. Animals don't communicate like that. They don't announce their presence and then retreat into silence. This was something else. Something older. Something that existed beyond the neat categories humans used to feel safe. As I reached the car, I realized my hands were shaking not from fear, but from adrenaline. The same electric energy Owen used to chase when he climbed cliffs and explored abandoned places. He used to say fear was proof that you were standing on the edge of discovery. For the first time since his death, I understood what he meant. That night, back at the cabin, I left the porch light off. I don't know why. Maybe part of me wanted to remove the barrier between us. I sat in the darkness, Owen's urn beside me, the forest stretching out like an ocean of shadow. Every sense was heightened. Every sound felt significant. Hours passed. Midnight came and went. I began to wonder if it would return at all. And then, without warning, the woods fell silent again. The same unnatural stillness. The same breathless pause. My heart pounded as I leaned forward, scanning the tree line. And slowly, impossibly, a shape began to emerge from the darkness. Taller than before. Closer than before. Watching me with a patience that felt almost human. It didn't step fully into the light. It stayed just beyond clarity, where doubt could still exist. But this time, there was no mistaking its form. Massive shoulders. Long arms. A silhouette that didn't belong to any known animal. My throat tightened as realization settled over me. This wasn't coincidence. This wasn't imagination. It had come back. And as it stood there, silent and unmoving, I felt something that made no sense at all. It wasn't just watching me. It was waiting. Waiting for something I didn't yet understand. Waiting for me. I don't know how long we stayed like that, me on the porch in darkness, and it at the edge of the trees, suspended in that impossible stillness. Time didn't feel linear anymore. It stretched and folded, looping around my fear and curiosity until I couldn't tell which one was stronger. The air between us felt charged, as if the mountain itself was aware of what was happening. My breathing slowed without my permission, matching a rhythm I didn't recognize. The figure didn't advance, but it didn't retreat either. It remained there, observing, its massive silhouette absorbing the faint silver light of the moon. And in that moment, something shifted inside me. The fear didn't disappear, but it stopped controlling me. It became something else. Something sharper. Something that wanted to understand. I leaned forward slightly, Owen's urn resting beside my thigh, and whispered, "Why?" I don't know why that was the word I chose. Maybe because it was the only question that had mattered since the day he died. Why him? Why now? Why this? The word drifted into the forest, fragile and insignificant. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the shape tilted its head. The motion was subtle, but unmistakable. My entire body froze. Animals don't tilt their heads like that, not with intention, not with consideration. It wasn't reacting to noise. It was reacting to meaning. That realization crashed into me with a force that stole the air from my lungs. This wasn't instinct. This was awareness. I stayed perfectly still, afraid that any sudden movement might break whatever invisible thread had formed between us. The forest remained silent, holding its breath. Even the wind seemed to pause, as if it too was listening. I could feel my pulse in my fingertips, in my throat, in the hollow space behind my eyes. The creature's outline shifted slightly, and for a brief second, moonlight caught along its shoulder, revealing texture, dark fur, thick and uneven, clinging to a body built with strength that didn't belong to this world. It wasn't the clean, sleek form of a predator. It was something older, heavier. Something that had endured. My mind struggled to reconcile what I was seeing with everything I believed to be real. And then, slowly, deliberately, it took a step forward. The sound was almost non-existent, just the faint compression of earth under immense weight. But I felt it more than I heard it. My muscles locked, instinct screaming at me to run, to hide, to survive. But I didn't move. I couldn't. Because beneath the terror, there was something else. Something impossible. Recognition. Not recognition of its form, but of its presence. The same strange familiarity I had felt standing beside Owen's hospital bed, staring at his empty body. That moment when you realize something essential is gone, but something else, something unseen, might still remain. The thought was irrational. Dangerous. Yet it refused to leave. The creature stopped again, just outside the reach of the porch steps. It didn't climb closer. It didn't reach out. It simply stood there, its massive shape rising above the ground like part of the forest itself. I couldn't see its eyes clearly, but I felt them. Focused. Intent. Studying me the way I studied it. The balance between us felt delicate, like glass stretched thin. I realized then that this wasn't an encounter driven by hunger or aggression. It was something else. Something quieter. Something more deliberate. The way it held itself, the way it waited, it didn't feel like a hunter. It felt like a witness. My throat tightened, and before I could stop myself, I spoke again. "Did you see him?" The words escaped without logic, pulled from a place deeper than conscious thought. I wasn't asking about Owen's death. I was asking about his absence. Asking if something out there had noticed the moment he disappeared from the world. The question hung in the air between us, fragile and absurd. The creature didn't respond, not with sound, not with movement. But something in its stillness changed. A subtle shift, almost imperceptible. As if it understood the weight behind the words, even if it couldn't answer them. Minutes passed, or maybe seconds. Time had lost its meaning. Eventually, the creature lowered its head slightly, its massive shoulders rising and falling in a slow, controlled motion. It wasn't submission. It wasn't threat. It was acknowledgement. The gesture was small, but it carried an emotional weight that hit me harder than any sound could have. Tears filled my eyes before I realized I was crying. Not from fear. From something else. Something closer to relief. Because in that moment, standing alone in the dark, I no longer felt completely alone. The creature remained there a while longer, its presence steady and unhurried. Then, just as slowly as it had appeared, it began to step backward. Each movement was deliberate, measured, as if it understood the importance of distance. It didn't turn its back to me. It didn't break the connection. It simply retreated into shadow, dissolving into the forest that had hidden it so well. Within seconds, it was gone. The tree line returned to its ordinary shape, empty and harmless. But the air still held the echo of its presence, like warmth lingering after someone leaves a room. I sat there for a long time after it disappeared, my hands trembling, my mind struggling to process what had just happened. The porch felt different now. Smaller somehow. Less safe, but also less empty. I realized that the encounter hadn't felt random. It hadn't felt like an accident. It had felt intentional. As if something had come to observe me, to understand me, just as much as I had tried to understand it. That thought should have terrified me. Instead, it filled me with a strange sense of calm. Because for the first time since Owen died, something in the world had responded to my presence instead of ignoring it. Eventually, exhaustion pulled me back inside. I locked the door out of habit, though I wasn't sure the lock meant anything anymore. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying every detail over and over, afraid that sleep might erase it. But sleep came anyway, heavy and dreamless. And when morning finally arrived, the forest outside looked the same as always. Quiet. Ordinary. Unchanged. Except I knew the truth. I knew that somewhere beyond those trees, something had seen me. Something had listened. Something had chosen to reveal itself and, just as importantly, had chosen not to harm me. I stepped onto the porch again, scanning the ground for new footprints, new signs, any evidence that the night had been real. The earth was undisturbed. No tracks. No broken branches. Nothing. If I hadn't lived it, I might have believed it was a dream. But deep down, I knew better. Because the feeling hadn't left. That quiet awareness lingered, subtle but undeniable. The mountain was still watching. And now, for reasons I didn't yet understand, I was watching back. Somewhere in the distance, far beyond the tree line, that same low, hollow sound echoed once more. Not loud. Not threatening. Just present. And in that moment, I realized something that made my stomach tighten with both fear and anticipation. The encounter wasn't over. It had only changed. Because whatever lived in those mountains wasn't just observing me anymore. It was waiting for the next move. And somehow, without fully understanding why, I knew that move would have to come from me. The next decision I made was the kind that divides your life into before and after. I didn't tell anyone what had happened. Not the ranger station. Not the cabin owner. Not even my parents. I kept it inside me like a secret that was too fragile to survive disbelief. Because I knew, with a certainty that defied logic, that if I spoke it out loud to the wrong person, it would collapse into something smaller. Something explainable. And what I had experienced was not small. It was not explainable. It was real in the way grief is real, heavy, undeniable, impossible to ignore. So instead of leaving Gatlinburg, I stayed. And the longer I stayed, the more I began to understand that the mountains weren't just a place. They were a presence. I started walking the trails alone, choosing the quieter paths where fewer tourists wandered. Every sound felt amplified now. Every broken twig, every rustle of leaves, every shift in the wind carried meaning. I wasn't just walking anymore. I was listening. Watching. Waiting. The forest didn't feel hostile. It felt observant. Like it was aware of my intrusion, but not offended by it. There was a strange balance to it, a silent agreement that I couldn't explain. I stayed on marked paths, but my eyes drifted constantly beyond them, searching for movement that might reveal the watcher. Sometimes I thought I saw something, an unnatural shape between trees, a shadow that lingered too long. But whenever I focused directly, it was gone. Always just beyond certainty. One afternoon, I climbed a narrow trail that led to an overlook Owen and I had visited years ago. Back then, we had stood at the edge laughing, throwing small stones into the endless drop below. He had told me that heights made him feel honest, because they stripped away illusion. Standing there now, I felt that honesty again, but it wasn't comforting. It was exposing. The mountains stretched forever in waves of green and blue, their vastness dwarfing everything human. I held the urn in my hands, feeling its cold, smooth surface. "I brought you back," I whispered. The wind answered by pushing softly against my face, carrying the scent of pine and earth. And beneath it, faint but unmistakable, came that low, hollow sound again. My heart stuttered. I turned slowly, scanning the tree line behind me. Nothing moved. Nothing revealed itself. But the sound had been real. It hadn't come from memory. It had come from the forest. The realization filled me with both dread and certainty. It was still there. Still watching. Still aware of me. And somehow, it knew where I was. I waited, holding my breath, hoping it would appear again. But it didn't. Instead, the silence returned, thicker than before. I realized then that this was part of its nature. It didn't reveal itself fully. It offered fragments. Glimpses. Enough to be known, but never enough to be understood. That night, I did something different. Instead of sitting on the porch, I stepped off it. Just one step at first, onto the cold earth. My body resisted, every instinct warning me that I was crossing a boundary I couldn't uncross. But I kept going. Slowly. Carefully. The forest loomed ahead, its darkness deeper than anything the porch light had ever revealed. I stopped at the edge of the trees, my breath visible in the cool night air. "I'm not afraid of you," I said, though the light trembled in my voice. The words hung in the silence, fragile and exposed. And for a long moment, nothing answered. Then, from somewhere deep in the darkness, came movement. Not sudden. Not violent. Just present. A shift in shadow. A weight redistributing itself across the forest floor. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might betray me. I stayed where I was, refusing to run. The darkness ahead felt alive, thick with possibility. And then I saw it again. Not fully. Not clearly. But enough. A massive outline, partially hidden behind a cluster of trees. Watching. Always watching. It didn't move closer. It didn't retreat. It simply existed there, its presence pressing against my senses like gravity. For the first time, I noticed how tall it truly was. Taller than any man. Taller than the porch roof behind me. Its shoulders were broad, its posture upright in a way that felt deeply unnatural and deeply familiar at the same time. This wasn't the posture of an animal. It was the posture of something aware of its own form. Something that knew how it appeared. The realization unsettled me in ways I couldn't fully articulate. Because awareness changes everything. Awareness implies thought. Intention. Choice. And choice implies meaning. I took a single step forward. The moment my foot touched the earth, the creature reacted not by fleeing, but by straightening slightly, as if acknowledging the movement. My breath caught. The space between us felt electric, charged with unspoken understanding. We were both testing something. Boundaries. Limits. Trust. I realized then that fear was no longer the only force holding me there. Curiosity had grown stronger. Strong enough to challenge instinct. Strong enough to keep me rooted in place when every logical part of me screamed to retreat. We stayed like that for what felt like an eternity. Two beings separated by distance, but connected by something invisible and undeniable. I wondered what it saw when it looked at me. Did it see weakness? Grief? Threat? Or did it see something else entirely? The idea that it might be trying to understand me the way I was trying to understand it was both terrifying and comforting. Because understanding requires patience. And patience requires restraint. It hadn't attacked. It hadn't threatened. It had only watched. Eventually, it stepped backward, disappearing once again into shadow. The forest reclaimed its emptiness, its illusion of normalcy. But the encounter had changed something fundamental inside me. I no longer felt like an intruder. I felt like part of something larger. Something ancient. Something that existed beyond human definitions of reality. I stood there long after it was gone, my body trembling not from fear, but from realization. Because whatever this was, whatever it meant, it wasn't finished. As I returned to the cabin, I realized something that made my stomach tighten with quiet certainty. This wasn't just a random encounter between a human and an unknown creature. It was a process. A slow unfolding. Each appearance more deliberate than the last. Each moment building towards something I couldn't yet see. And deep down, beneath the fear and confusion, I knew one thing with absolute clarity. The mountains had accepted me. And whatever lived within them had begun to reveal itself, for reasons I had yet to understand. That night, as I lay in bed staring into darkness, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was connected to Owen. Not his death, but his absence. As if the void he left behind had made space for something else to enter. The thought terrified me. But it also gave me something I hadn't felt since he died. Purpose. And in the silence of the mountain night, I realized with chilling certainty that this was no longer just about grief. It was about discovery. And discovery always comes at a cost. By the fifth day, the fear had transformed into something quieter, more dangerous. It was no longer a sharp spike in my chest. It had become a constant presence, like a second heartbeat I couldn't silence. I stopped checking out of the cabin. I stopped pretending I was just another tourist passing through. I began to live according to the mountain's rhythm instead of my own. I woke early, listening for sounds beyond the ordinary. I stayed awake late, watching the tree line as if it were a doorway that might open again. And deep down, I knew something had changed, not just in the forest, but in me. I was no longer waiting for it to appear. I was waiting for it to call me. It happened late that afternoon while I was sitting on the porch with Owen's urn resting on the wooden railing. The sky was overcast, clouds pressing low over the peaks, muting the colors of the world. The forest looked heavier under that gray light, as if it were holding something beneath its surface. I had stopped speaking out loud, stopped asking questions that never received answers. Instead, I listened. Really listened. And that's when I heard something new. Not the hollow sound from before. Not the shifting of branches. This was different. It was rhythmic. Slow. Intentional. Footsteps. My body reacted instantly, muscles tightening before my mind could catch up. The steps were faint, but unmistakable. Heavy. Deliberate. Moving parallel to the cabin, hidden by the density of the trees. It wasn't approaching directly. It was circling. My breath became shallow, my ears straining to track the sound. I turned my head slowly, trying to locate its source. The forest revealed nothing. Just trunks and shadow and stillness. But the sound continued. One step. Then another. Then silence. The silence was worse than the movement. Because it meant it had stopped. And if it had stopped, it was watching again. I stood carefully, every motion slow and measured, afraid that sudden movement might break whatever fragile boundary existed between us. The porch creaked beneath my weight, and the sound seemed impossibly loud in the stillness. I stepped closer to the edge, peering into the trees. My heart pounded so violently I was certain it could hear it. And then I saw it. Not its full form. Not clearly. But enough. A massive shape partially concealed behind a wide oak tree, its outline barely distinguishable from the darkness around it. It hadn't been there seconds ago. Or maybe it had, and I simply hadn't seen it. The creature didn't move. It didn't try to hide further. It stood there, perfectly still, its immense presence blending into the forest like something that had always belonged there. My eyes struggled to adjust, trying to separate shadow from substance. I could see the curve of its shoulder, the unnatural height of its frame. My throat tightened as realization settled in again. It wasn't afraid of being seen. It had allowed itself to be seen. That choice carried meaning I couldn't yet understand. I swallowed, forcing myself to remain calm. Every instinct told me to retreat into the cabin, to lock the door, to create distance. But I didn't. Because distance no longer felt like protection. It felt like separation. And something inside me didn't want that separation anymore. I didn't step closer, but I didn't step back either. I stayed exactly where I was, caught between fear and something far more powerful. Something that felt like inevitability. The creature shifted slightly, its massive frame adjusting its weight with a slow, controlled motion. The movement was smooth, deliberate, nothing like the jerky reflexes of an animal startled by human presence. It wasn't reacting to me. It was acknowledging me. That difference sent a cold wave through my body. Because acknowledgement implies awareness. Awareness implies understanding. And understanding implies intention. For a brief moment, I thought about Owen. I thought about the way he used to stand in doorways without speaking, just watching the world with quiet intensity. He always said observation was a form of connection. That you didn't need words to understand something deeply. The memory hit me harder than I expected, blurring my vision with sudden emotion. I realized then that whatever stood in front of me wasn't just observing my body. It was observing my state. My stillness. My grief. My presence. I took a breath and did something I never thought I would do. I stepped off the porch completely, onto the forest floor. The earth felt cold and uneven beneath my shoes. My pulse roared in my ears. The creature didn't retreat. It didn't advance. It simply remained there, its massive silhouette towering among the trees. The distance between us had shrunk, but the tension had grown heavier. I realized then that proximity wasn't just physical. It was psychological. Emotional. Something deeper than space. For a long moment, neither of us moved. The world felt suspended around us, held in place by something invisible. Then, slowly, almost imperceptibly, the creature tilted its head again. The same gesture as before. The same impossible awareness. My breath caught in my throat. It wasn't curiosity alone. It was recognition. As if it had seen me before. As if it knew something about me that I didn't know about myself. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, it stepped backward into shadow. One step. Then another. Its form dissolved into the forest until nothing remained but empty space. The silence returned, deeper than before. But this time, it didn't feel like absence. It felt like promise. Because I knew now, with absolute certainty, that it wasn't avoiding me. It was pacing the encounter. Controlling it. Guiding it. I stood there long after it disappeared, my heart still racing, my mind struggling to comprehend what was happening. This wasn't random. This wasn't accidental. This was deliberate. Every appearance. Every movement. Every moment of stillness. It was building toward something. Something I couldn't yet see. But I could feel it approaching, slow and inevitable, like the moment before a storm breaks. And somewhere deep inside me, beneath the fear, beneath the grief, I realized something that terrified me more than anything else. I wasn't just being watched anymore. I was being prepared. That night, I didn't go back inside immediately. I stayed at the edge of the forest, standing in the exact place where it had stood moments before. The air felt different there, denser, charged with something I couldn't explain. My instincts told me I was standing in a place of significance, like the ground itself had become part of whatever connection was forming between us. I looked down, half expecting to see fresh footprints pressed into the soil, but the earth was still. Undisturbed. It was as if the creature could choose when to leave evidence and when to leave nothing at all. That thought unsettled me more than its physical presence ever had. Because it suggested control. Not just over its body, but over the encounter itself. I crouched slowly, my fingers hovering inches above the ground. The soil was cold, damp from the evening air. I imagined the immense weight of it standing here, imagined the silent strength required to move without sound. It didn't make sense. Nothing about this made sense. And yet, my fear had begun to evolve into something more complex. It wasn't just terror anymore. It was awareness. Awareness that I was part of something unfolding, something deliberate. My heart pounded, but I didn't retreat. I stayed there, suspended between instinct and something deeper, something that told me leaving now would mean abandoning something I was meant to see through. Behind me, the cabin stood silent, its windows dark and lifeless. It no longer felt like shelter. It felt like a boundary. A separation between two worlds I was now standing between. The human world behind me. The unknown world in front of me. I realized, with a quiet certainty, that I was no longer fully anchored to either one. That realization didn't bring comfort. It brought clarity. And clarity, I was learning, could be far more dangerous than fear. The forest ahead remained motionless, but the feeling of being watched hadn't left. It lingered in the air, subtle but undeniable. I turned slowly, scanning the tree line, my eyes adjusting to the layers of darkness. Every shadow felt alive. Every shape held possibility. I strained to hear something, anything, but the silence remained absolute. It wasn't empty silence. It was intentional. The kind of silence that exists when something is waiting. Observing. Choosing its moment. I stood there longer than I should have, my body resisting the urge to retreat. Eventually, the cold forced me back toward the cabin. My hands trembled as I reached the door, not from fear, but from anticipation. I locked it behind me out of habit, though the action felt symbolic now. Meaningless. If it wanted to enter, locks wouldn't matter. That realization didn't terrify me the way it should have. Instead, it filled me with a strange acceptance. Because deep down, I didn't believe it wanted to harm me. Not yet. Sleep came slowly that night. My mind replayed every movement, every sound, every impossible detail. The tilt of its head. The deliberate stillness. The awareness behind its presence. Over and over, my thoughts returned to one question I couldn't answer: why me? Out of everyone who had ever walked these mountains, why had it chosen to reveal itself to me? The question lingered long after exhaustion finally pulled me into sleep. I dreamed of Owen. Not the way he had looked in the hospital. Not fragile and empty. But alive. Standing at the edge of the forest, exactly where the creature had stood. He didn't speak. He simply watched me, the same quiet intensity in his eyes I remembered from childhood. Behind him, something moved. A massive shadow, shifting between trees. Owen didn't react. He didn't seem afraid. Instead, he stepped backward, disappearing into the darkness. And as he vanished, I felt a sudden, overwhelming certainty that he wasn't alone out there. I woke before dawn, my chest tight, my skin cold with sweat. The dream clung to me with unsettling clarity. It didn't feel like imagination. It felt like memory. That thought stayed with me as I stepped onto the porch, the early morning air biting against my skin. The forest looked unchanged. Peaceful. Ordinary. But I knew better now. I knew how easily that illusion could break. And then I saw it. Not the creature itself. But movement high in the trees. A branch swayed, bending under weight too heavy for wind. My breath caught. I stared, waiting for the shape to emerge. It didn't. The branch slowly returned to its original position, as if nothing had touched it at all. But I knew what I had seen. It was still there. Still close. Still watching. My heart pounded, but I didn't retreat. Instead, I stepped forward, descending the porch steps once more. The ground felt colder than before, as if it remembered something I didn't. I stopped at the same place as the night before, my eyes fixed on the tree line. The forest remained silent. But the silence no longer felt empty. It felt alive. A living boundary between what I knew and what I didn't. I realized then that this wasn't just an encounter. It was a process. A slow unveiling. Each moment bringing me closer to something I couldn't yet understand. And deep down, beneath the fear, beneath the uncertainty, I felt something else rising. Something dangerous. Something irreversible. I wasn't just waiting for it anymore. I was beginning to want it to come closer. That realization terrified me more than anything else. Because it meant the mountain wasn't just changing what I saw. It was changing me. On the seventh day, the mountain stopped pretending to be neutral. It no longer felt like a place I was visiting. It felt like a place I was being kept. The air itself carried a weight that hadn't been there before, like an invisible pressure slowly closing around me. Even the sounds had changed. Birds no longer sang near the cabin. The wind moved differently, brushing the trees in long, slow motions that resembled breathing more than weather. I found myself moving more carefully, more deliberately, as if some part of me understood that I was no longer just an observer. I was part of the environment now. Part of whatever this had become. I began noticing patterns. Not random occurrences, but sequences. The hollow sound always came before dusk. The movement in the trees always happened when I stood still long enough. The silence always arrived first, deep, unnatural, total, before it revealed itself. It wasn't chaotic. It was structured. Intentional. It wasn't stalking me. It was conditioning me. Preparing me to recognize it. Preparing me to accept its presence as something inevitable rather than impossible. That realization unsettled me more deeply than anything else. Because conditioning implies intelligence. And intelligence implies purpose. That afternoon, I walked farther into the forest than I ever had before. Not recklessly. Carefully. Every step measured, every breath controlled. I carried Owen's urn with me, cradled against my chest, unsure why but unable to leave it behind. The deeper I went, the quieter the world became. The usual sounds of insects and birds faded until only the faint rustle of leaves remained. The silence wasn't empty. It was attentive. Watching me the way I was watching it. My pulse echoed loudly in my ears, each beat marking my presence like a signal. Then I saw something that made me stop cold. A tree trunk, about 20 yards ahead, bore deep vertical scratches. Not random damage. Not decay. These were deliberate marks, carved into the bark with immense force. Each groove was thick and deep, spaced evenly apart, far higher than any bear could reach without climbing. My throat tightened as I stepped closer. The wood around the marks was fresh, pale against the darker bark. Recent. My fingers hovered near one of the grooves, but I didn't touch it. I didn't need to. I already knew what had made it. It wasn't marking territory. It was marking presence. My heart pounded harder as I looked around, scanning the trees, half expecting to see it standing there again. The forest revealed nothing. But the silence had thickened. The air felt charged. I realized then that this wasn't a random discovery. It was a message. Not written in words, but in force. In permanence. Something had stood here and declared itself to the forest. And now, it had allowed me to see it. I swallowed hard, my mouth dry, and whispered Owen's name again. I didn't know why I kept doing that. Maybe because speaking his name made me feel less alone. Maybe because part of me believed he was somehow connected to this place now. The thought should have felt absurd. Instead, it felt possible. Because nothing about this experience obeyed the rules I thought governed reality. And then I heard it. Not the hollow sound. Not movement. Breath. Slow. Heavy. Close. Every muscle in my body locked instantly. The sound came from behind me, no more than 10 feet away. I hadn't heard it approach. I hadn't heard anything at all. It had simply appeared. My instincts screamed at me to run, but I couldn't move. Because something deeper than fear held me still. Something that understood this moment mattered. I turned slowly. At first, I saw nothing. Just trees. Shadows. The illusion of emptiness. And then it shifted. A massive form standing between two trunks, so perfectly still it had blended into the forest itself. Its height was overwhelming. Its shoulders impossibly broad. Its fur dark and uneven, catching fragments of light. For the first time, I could see its face, not clearly, not fully, but enough to know it was looking directly at me. Not through me. At me. The awareness in that gaze was undeniable. It wasn't the empty stare of an animal. It was focused. Intentional. Studying me with the same intensity one had studied it. Time collapsed in that moment. The world reduced itself to 2 points of awareness connected by silence. My breath trembled in my chest. I realized then that this was the closest it had ever been. It hadn't approached like a predator. It had approached like something curious. Like something trying to understand. Neither of us moved. The air between us felt electric, fragile, as if the wrong motion might break whatever invisible boundary existed between our worlds. My fear remained, but it no longer controlled me. Something else had taken its place. Something quieter. Something deeper. Recognition. And in that impossible stillness, I understood something that made my stomach tighten with awe and terror. It hadn't been following me. It had been waiting for me to come to it. I don't remember deciding to stay. I don't remember choosing not to run. My body simply remained where it was, locked between instinct and something deeper than instinct. The creature stood in front of me, close enough now that the illusion of doubt had begun to dissolve. It wasn't a shadow anymore. It wasn't a suggestion. It was real. Its massive chest rose and fell with slow, controlled breaths, each exhale visible in the cold mountain air. The sound of it breathing filled the silence between us, grounding the moment in undeniable reality. And for the first time since this began, I realized something terrifying. It wasn't hiding anymore. Its face remained partially obscured by darkness, but I could make out structure now. A pronounced brow. Deep-set eyes reflecting faint fragments of light. A nose wider and flatter than any human's, but not entirely animal either. It existed somewhere between definitions, somewhere outside anything I had ever been taught to understand. My mind struggled to categorize it, to assign it a place within the world I knew. But there was no place. It wasn't supposed to exist. And yet, it did. And it was standing in front of me as if it had every right to be there. I realized then that it wasn't just observing my body. It was studying my reactions. Every small movement. Every shift in breath. It watched the way my chest rose and fell, the way my hands trembled at my sides. It wasn't looking at me like prey. It was looking at me like data. Like something it was trying to understand. That realization sent a chill through my spine. Because it meant this wasn't random curiosity. It was intentional observation. It had a reason. My heart pounded painfully in my chest, but I forced myself to remain still. Running now would mean breaking something fragile, something that had taken days to build. I didn't know why that mattered. I didn't know why part of me cared. But I did. Because somewhere deep inside, I understood that this moment was a threshold. And once crossed, nothing would ever be the same again. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the creature leaned forward. The movement was small, controlled, careful. Not aggressive. Not threatening. Curious. Its head tilted slightly, its gaze fixed on my face. I could feel the weight of its attention, heavy and deliberate. My breath caught in my throat as the distance between us shrank to something intimate and impossible. I could see the texture of its fur now, thick, coarse strands layered over muscle that moved with quiet strength. It wasn't grotesque. It wasn't monstrous. It was real. Alive in a way that defied fear. And then something happened that shattered every expectation I had. It stopped. It didn't reach for me. It didn't move closer. It simply held its position, respecting a boundary I hadn't realized existed. That restraint meant something. It meant it understood distance. It understood limits. It understood me. My throat tightened as emotion rose unexpectedly inside me. Not fear. Not panic. Something else. Something that felt dangerously close to trust. I hated myself for feeling it. I hated the part of me that didn't want it to disappear. Because its presence, as terrifying as it was, had begun to fill the emptiness Owen had left behind. I swallowed hard and whispered his name again. Owen. The word hung in the air between us. The creature reacted. Not with movement, but with awareness. Its head tilted slightly more, as if the sound had meaning. As if it recognized something beyond the word itself. My heart stopped. The moment stretched impossibly thin. I didn't understand how. I didn't understand why. But it had heard me. Not just the sound, but the emotion behind it. And then, slowly, it did something I will never forget. It lowered its head. Not in submission. Not in threat. In acknowledgement. The gesture was small, but it carried a weight that crushed every rational explanation I had left. Tears filled my eyes as realization settled over me. This wasn't just an encounter between species. This was something deeper. Something older. Something that existed beyond language. It understood loss. Or at least, it understood me. The forest remained silent around us, as if the mountain itself was witnessing what was happening. Neither of us moved. Neither of us broke the moment. Time had become irrelevant. Only presence mattered now. And in that presence, I realized something that terrified me more than anything else. I didn't feel alone anymore. The moment stretched beyond anything I had ever experienced, as if reality itself had slowed to allow it to exist. My breathing became shallow, controlled by something deeper than conscious thought. The creature remained still, its massive frame unmoving, yet its presence filled everything. It wasn't just occupying space, it was altering it. The air felt heavier around us, charged with an energy I couldn't explain. I realized then that this wasn't just physical proximity. This was something psychological. Emotional. Something that existed beyond instinct. And the longer it stayed, the more I understood that this encounter had never been accidental. I noticed its eyes more clearly now. They weren't glowing. They weren't supernatural. They were real. Dark. Reflective. Aware. And inside them, there was something I hadn't expected to see. Not aggression. Not hunger. Not fear. Recognition. The same quiet recognition I had seen in Owen's eyes so many times before, when he understood something without needing to say it aloud. That realization hit me harder than anything else. Because it meant this creature wasn't just aware of me. It was aware of my existence. Of my presence as something distinct. Something separate from the forest, yet somehow connected to it. My hands trembled at my sides, but I didn't raise them. I didn't speak. Words suddenly felt useless. Inadequate. Whatever was happening here didn't belong to language. It belonged to silence. To presence. To something older than communication. I realized then that fear had been replaced by something far more dangerous. Acceptance. Not acceptance of what it was, but acceptance of the fact that it was real. The creature inhaled slowly, its chest expanding with a deep, controlled breath. The sound was soft, almost inaudible, but I felt it resonate through the ground beneath my feet. My body reacted instinctively, my muscles tightening, waiting for movement. But it didn't advance. It didn't retreat. It simply remained. Watching. Measuring. Understanding. It wasn't waiting for permission. It was waiting for certainty. And in that moment, I understood something that terrified me. It wasn't deciding whether to approach me. It was deciding whether I was ready. The thought entered my mind without logic, without reason. But it felt true in a way nothing else had. This wasn't about threat. It was about readiness. About trust. About something I didn't yet fully understand. The creature's stillness wasn't hesitation. It was evaluation. It had come close enough to see me clearly. Now it was deciding what I meant. I swallowed hard, my throat dry, and took a slow breath of my own. My heart pounded against my ribs, each beat echoing louder in the silence. I realized that this moment wasn't something I could control. I couldn't force it to stay. I couldn't force it to leave. All I could do was exist in its presence and allow whatever was happening to unfold naturally. That lack of control should have terrified me. Instead, it grounded me. Because for the first time since Owen died, I wasn't trying to escape the moment. I was inside it. The creature shifted its weight slightly, its massive frame moving with careful precision. The motion was subtle, but deliberate. It wasn't retreating. It wasn't advancing. It was adjusting. As if aligning itself with something invisible. My breath caught again. Every movement it made carried meaning. Nothing was wasted. Nothing was accidental. This wasn't instinct. This was intention. I realized then that it had never tried to intimidate me. It had never displayed aggression. It had never made itself fully known until I was ready to see it. That understanding changed everything. Because it meant this encounter wasn't about fear. It was about awareness. About crossing a boundary that existed not in the forest, but inside myself. And then, slowly, it did something that made my entire body freeze. It stepped aside. Not backward. Not away. To the side. The movement revealed something behind it. A narrow opening between the trees, almost invisible in the darkness. A path. One I hadn't noticed before. One that hadn't been visible until now. My heart pounded as realization flooded my mind. It wasn't blocking my way. It was showing me one. The creature turned its head slightly, its gaze shifting toward the opening. Then it looked back at me. The message was clear, even without words. This wasn't the end of the encounter. It was an invitation. I didn't move at first. My body resisted the implication of what I was seeing. The narrow path behind the creature looked older than the surrounding forest, as if it had existed long before the trees had grown tall enough to hide it. The darkness inside it wasn't ordinary shadow, it felt deeper, thicker, like it belonged to another layer of the mountain entirely. My heart pounded violently in my chest as my mind tried to make sense of what was happening. The creature remained to the side, its massive form no longer blocking my view. It wasn't forcing me. It wasn't pressuring me. It was allowing me to choose. That realization terrified me more than anything else. Because it meant whatever happened next would be my decision. My breath came slowly, uneven, as I stared into the opening. Every instinct told me this was dangerous. That stepping forward meant crossing something I wouldn't be able to return from unchanged. But another part of me, quieter, deeper, felt something else entirely. Recognition. Familiarity. As if this path wasn't new, but forgotten. As if some part of me had always known it was there. That thought made my chest tighten with confusion and fear. Because I knew I had never walked here before. And yet, nothing about this felt completely foreign. I glanced back at the creature. It hadn't moved. It stood with the same calm stillness, its dark eyes fixed on me, waiting. Not commanding. Not threatening. Waiting. That patience carried meaning I couldn't ignore. It wasn't expecting obedience. It was expecting understanding. The distinction was subtle, but profound. And somehow, I knew it would not follow unless I chose to step forward first. My hands trembled as I tightened my grip on Owen's urn. The weight of it grounded me, reminded me why I had come here in the first place. I had come to say goodbye. To release him. To let him go. But now, standing here at the edge of something impossible, I realized goodbye wasn't as simple as I had believed. Because part of me wasn't ready to release him. And something deep in the forest seemed to know that. The silence stretched, pressing against me from all sides. I realized that standing still was its own kind of decision. A refusal. A retreat into the safety of the known. But safety suddenly felt fragile. Temporary. Incomplete. Because I knew, with terrifying certainty, that if I turned around now and walked back to the cabin, nothing would be the same. I would carry this moment with me forever. The unanswered question. The unfinished encounter. My foot moved before I consciously chose to move it. One step forward. The forest seemed to inhale. The ground beneath my shoe felt different the moment I crossed into the narrow opening. Colder. Denser. My pulse roared in my ears, each heartbeat louder than the last. I didn't look back immediately. I was afraid of what I might see. Afraid that the creature might be gone. Afraid that it might be closer. Slowly, I turned my head. It was still there. Watching. Waiting. And then, after a moment that felt suspended outside time, it moved. Not toward me. After me. It stepped forward, entering the path behind me with silent precision. The soundless motion sent a shock through my entire body. It wasn't forcing me forward. It was accompanying me. That realization shattered the last illusion of control I had been holding onto. This wasn't my path alone. It never had been. The forest closed around us as we moved deeper. The air grew colder. Thicker. The light behind us faded quickly, swallowed by the density of the trees. Every step forward felt heavier, as if I were descending into something older than memory. I could feel its presence behind me, not touching, not threatening, but there. Constant. A shadow bound to my movement. And then I saw something ahead that made my breath stop completely. The path didn't lead nowhere. It led to a clearing. And in the center of that clearing, something was waiting. The clearing was unlike anything I had seen before. It didn't feel like part of the forest. It felt separate. Isolated. As if the mountain itself had carved out this space for a purpose older than anything human. The trees formed a perfect circle around it, their trunks thick and unmoving, their branches interlocking above like silent witnesses. The air was colder here, heavy with stillness. Even the ground looked different. The usual layer of leaves and debris was gone, replaced by bare earth, smooth, undisturbed, almost intentional. My breath caught in my throat as I stepped closer to the center. Every instinct told me this place mattered. I could feel it behind me. Not touching. Not threatening. Present. The creature had stopped at the edge of the clearing, its massive silhouette standing between the trees. It didn't follow me in. It didn't cross the boundary. That restraint wasn't hesitation. It was respect. This space belonged to something else. And somehow, I knew it understood that. My heart pounded violently in my chest as I moved forward, Owen's urn held tightly against me. The silence here was absolute, deeper than anything I had experienced in the forest before. It wasn't empty. It was aware. The kind of silence that listens. My pulse echoed in my ears, loud and uneven, marking my presence in a place that felt untouched by time. And then I saw it. At the very center of the clearing, the ground had been disturbed. Not violently. Carefully. The soil had been moved aside in a shallow circle, about the width of a human body. The earth there was darker, softer, as if it had been opened and closed before. My breath trembled as realization spread through me. This wasn't random. This wasn't natural. This had been done deliberately. My hands shook as I stepped closer, my eyes locked on the circle in the ground. Every step felt heavier than the last, as if the earth itself resisted or welcomed me, I couldn't tell which. My mind raced with questions I couldn't answer. Why was this here? Who had made it? And more importantly, why had it brought me here? Behind me, the creature remained still. Watching. Waiting. Not interfering. The meaning of that restraint pressed into my chest. It hadn't forced me here. It had guided me. It had shown me the path. But this final step, it was mine alone to take. My throat tightened as emotion rose unexpectedly. I looked down at the urn in my hands, its smooth surface cold against my fingers. Owen had loved these mountains. He had believed there were things here people refused to see. Things older than fear. Older than belief. I had always thought he was chasing ghosts. But now, standing here, I realized he might have been searching for something real. My vision blurred as tears filled my eyes. I understood now. This wasn't just a place. This was a threshold. A place of crossing. A place where something ended. And something else began. My hands trembled as I lowered myself slowly to my knees at the edge of the disturbed earth. My heart pounded so violently I thought it might break through my chest. The urn felt heavier than it ever had before. Not physically. Emotionally. Spiritually. As if the moment itself had weight. Behind me, the creature didn't move. It didn't need to. It had already brought me here. Now, it was waiting to see what I would do. My hands trembled as I held the urn above the disturbed earth. The moment felt suspended, fragile, as if the entire mountain itself was waiting for what I would do next. My breathing was shallow, uneven, each inhale sharp against the cold air. I stared at the circle in the ground, unable to ignore the overwhelming sense that this place had been prepared. Not randomly. Not naturally. But intentionally. Prepared for this exact moment. Prepared for me. The thought sent a deep, electric fear through my chest. Because it meant this had never been coincidence. It had always been leading here. Behind me, I could feel its presence like gravity. Constant. Silent. Watching without judgment. It hadn't stepped into the clearing. It hadn't forced my hand. It had only guided me. That restraint carried meaning far beyond instinct. It understood choice. It understood timing. And somehow, it understood grief. My throat tightened as memories of Owen flooded my mind. His laugh. His voice. The way he used to stand at the edge of forests, staring into the distance as if listening to something no one else could hear. He had never been afraid of the unknown. He had been drawn to it. And now, standing here in this impossible place, I realized he might have understood something I never had. Tears slid down my face as I whispered his name again, my voice breaking under the weight of everything I had carried here. Owen. I'm sorry. The words barely existed before they dissolved into the silence. My fingers loosened slightly around the urn. My heart pounded so violently it hurt. This was the moment. The moment I had come here for. The moment I had feared more than anything else. Slowly, carefully, I tilted the urn forward. The ash inside shifted softly, a faint sound that seemed impossibly loud in the stillness. My breath caught in my throat as the first particles fell, drifting downward into the circle of earth below. The wind didn't move. The air didn't interfere. It was as if the mountain itself held its breath, allowing the moment to exist without disruption. The ash settled into the soil, dark against dark. Final. Permanent. Real. My vision blurred completely as emotion overwhelmed me. My body shook with silent sobs I couldn't stop. This was goodbye. Not symbolic. Not temporary. Final. I had carried him here. And now, I had let him go. Behind me, something shifted. Not aggressively. Not suddenly. Slowly. I felt it take one step forward. Not into the clearing. Closer to its edge. Closer to me. My breath froze in my chest as the sound reached me. My body tensed, but I didn't turn around. I couldn't. Not yet. I wasn't afraid anymore. I was aware. Aware that whatever this creature was, it had remained through every moment of my grief. It had watched without interfering. It had waited without demanding. It had witnessed my loss. The air grew colder. Heavier. Charged with something I couldn't explain. And then I heard it. A sound unlike anything before. Not a growl. Not a threat. A low, deep vibration. A sound that resonated through the ground itself. Through my bones. Through my chest. It wasn't anger. It wasn't hunger. It was acknowledgement. My tears fell freely as I slowly lowered the empty urn, my hands weak, my heart exposed. Something inside me had broken open. Something that had been locked away since Owen died. The crushing weight of unfinished goodbye had finally lifted. I realized then that I hadn't been brought here to face the creature. I had been brought here to face myself. And somehow, impossibly, I hadn't faced it alone. For a long moment, I remained on my knees, unable to move, unable to think. The clearing felt different now. Not empty, but complete. The disturbed earth no longer looked like an opening. It looked like something that had been closed. Finished. The ash had settled into the soil, disappearing into the mountain as if it had always belonged there. My hands rested weakly on my thighs, the empty urn still held loosely in my fingers. My breathing was uneven, fragile, as if part of me had been left behind with the ash. And maybe it had. Behind me, the creature remained at the edge of the clearing. It hadn't left. It hadn't retreated. It was still there. Not as a threat. Not as a predator. But as a witness. The realization settled into me slowly, deeply. It hadn't come to take anything from me. It hadn't come to harm me. It had come to watch. To ensure the moment was completed. To ensure the crossing had occurred. That thought sent a strange calm through my body. Because it meant this had never been about fear. It had been about transition. My tears slowed, though the ache in my chest remained. Grief doesn't disappear in a single moment. It changes shape. It loosens its grip. It becomes something quieter. Something you carry instead of something that crushes you. And as I sat there in the cold earth, I realized that something inside me had shifted. The unbearable weight I had carried for weeks was no longer suffocating me. It was still there, but it wasn't consuming me anymore. Slowly, I gathered the strength to stand. My legs trembled beneath me as I rose, the empty urn hanging at my side. I didn't turn immediately. I wasn't ready to break the fragile peace that had formed. The clearing felt sacred now. Not in a religious sense. But in something older. Something that existed beyond belief. A place where loss had been acknowledged. Where something had ended properly. The forest remained silent. Waiting. And I knew it was still there. Waiting for me. Not to follow. Not to guide. But to see. Slowly, carefully, I turned around. It stood exactly where it had been before. Its massive form partially hidden among the trees, its dark eyes fixed on me with the same quiet awareness. But something had changed. The tension that had existed between us was gone. It wasn't studying me anymore. It wasn't evaluating me. It was simply present. My breath caught as we looked at each other one last time. No fear. No panic. No uncertainty. Only understanding. It had brought me here. It had waited for me. And now, it was waiting for me to leave. The realization filled me with an unexpected sadness. Not grief. Not fear. Something else. Something that felt like the end of a connection I hadn't fully understood. Because despite everything, its presence had kept me from being alone in the darkest moment of my life. I tightened my grip on the empty urn and took a single step backward. The creature didn't move. It didn't follow. It didn't stop me. It simply watched. As if this had always been the way it would end. I took another step back, then another, my eyes never leaving its silhouette. The distance between us grew slowly, deliberately, as if the moment itself refused to end too quickly. The creature remained still, its massive form rooted to the forest's edge. It didn't try to close the distance. It didn't try to hold me there. It allowed me to leave. That simple act carried more meaning than anything else it had done. It wasn't possession. It wasn't control. It was release. My breathing steadied as I moved farther from the clearing, though my chest still felt fragile, exposed. The forest around me began to feel different again. Less heavy. Less charged. The invisible pressure that had surrounded me for days was beginning to loosen. It wasn't gone, but it was changing. Fading. Like something that had fulfilled its purpose and no longer needed to remain. I reached the narrow path again, the same one it had revealed to me. For a moment, I hesitated. Something inside me resisted turning my back completely. Because turning away meant accepting that this part of the encounter was over. That whatever connection had existed here would remain behind me. Slowly, I looked back one last time. It was still there. Watching. Silent. Unmoving. But different. The intensity in its posture had softened. It wasn't focused on me the same way it had been before. It was no longer studying me. It was simply present. As if its role in this moment had ended, just as mine had. A strange calm settled over me as I turned forward again and began walking. Each step carried me farther from the clearing, farther from the impossible space where grief and something older had intersected. The forest sounds slowly returned. The faint rustle of leaves. The distant call of birds. Ordinary life reassembling itself around me. The mountain was breathing again. By the time I reached the cabin, the sun had begun to rise. Pale light stretched across the horizon, pushing back the darkness that had defined the past week. I stood on the porch, the empty urn still in my hand, and looked out toward the forest. It appeared ordinary again. Silent. Still. Nothing moved among the trees. But I knew. I knew what existed beyond what I could see. I knew what had waited for me. I knew what had witnessed my loss. The days that followed felt different. The crushing weight of Owen's death no longer consumed every breath I took. The pain remained, but it had changed shape. It had become something quieter. Something I could carry without breaking. And though I never saw the creature again, I felt its absence as clearly as I had once felt its presence. Sometimes, late at night, I would stand at the edge of the forest and listen. Not with fear. Not with expectation. But with awareness. The mountain never revealed it again. But it didn't need to. Because something inside me had changed. I had come to Gatlinburg to say goodbye to my brother. But I left with something I never expected. I left knowing that in my darkest moment, when I believed I was completely alone, something ancient had been watching. Not to harm me. Not to take me. But to guide me through the moment I couldn't survive alone. And sometimes, even now, when the wind moves through the trees just right, I feel it watching. Not as a threat. Not as a shadow. But as a reminder. That I was never truly alone. Years have passed since that week in Gatlinburg, but the memory has never faded. Time has a way of softening pain, but it does not erase moments that reshape who you are. I returned to my life. I returned to routine. To noise. To people who spoke about ordinary things, unaware that something extraordinary had existed just beyond their understanding. I never told anyone the full truth. Not because I was afraid they wouldn't believe me, but because belief was irrelevant. What happened wasn't something meant to be proven. It was something meant to be experienced. Something meant to change me. At first, I questioned myself. I wondered if grief had distorted my mind. If loneliness had created something that wasn't real. But those doubts never lasted. Because deep down, beneath logic and explanation, I knew what I had seen. I knew what had stood in front of me. I knew what had watched me not with hunger, but with awareness. And I knew that whatever it was, it had never intended to harm me. It had waited. It had guided. It had witnessed. There are moments now, late at night, when I wake suddenly without knowing why. The room silent. The air still. And for just a second, I feel it again. Not fear. Not danger. Presence. Distant. Patient. Unseen, but not absent. The feeling fades quickly, but it leaves something behind. A quiet certainty. A reminder that some connections do not end simply because we leave the place where they began. I went back to Gatlinburg once, years later. I didn't plan to. It just happened. I found myself driving the same winding roads, climbing toward the same mountains. The forest looked the same. Unchanged. Timeless. I stood at the edge of the trees, my heart steady, my mind quiet. I didn't expect to see it again. I didn't need to. Because what mattered had already happened. I stayed there until the sun began to set. The wind moved through the branches in slow, deliberate waves. And for a moment, I felt it. Not with my eyes. Not with sound. But with something deeper. Awareness. It was still there. Not watching me the way it had before. Not guiding me. Not waiting. But existing. And somehow, knowing that was enough. Because I understood now what I hadn't understood then. It had never come to take my brother. It had never come to take me. It had come because something in my grief had called into the mountain. And the mountain had answered. Not with words. Not with comfort. But with presence. It had stood beside me when I faced something I believed I could not survive. And in doing so, it had given me something I never expected. Closure. Even now, sometimes, when I stand alone beneath tall trees and feel the world grow quiet around me, I remember. I remember the silence. I remember the eyes. I remember the moment I realized I wasn't alone. And I wonder, not if it still exists, but if, somewhere deep in those endless mountains, it still remembers me too.